All right, Genesis 37. We'll be considering particularly verses 12 through 17. So we'll be looking at these 6 verses that will occupy our time today. Why don't we pray and we will read the chapter. Heavenly Father, we've gathered together once more in the name of your dear Son. And we ask of you now that you would help us to understand your word, to gain a great appreciation for the Lord Jesus Christ as a result of the things we read here today and seek to understand. Pray for effectiveness for your truth as it goes out and is scattered upon this gathering and those who hear these words, that it would bear fruit that would go on into eternity. Amen. Genesis 37 will begin in verse 2 and read through to the end of the chapter. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his sons, because he was the son of his old age. And he made him a robe, many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. Now Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Hear this dream that I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright. And behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." His brothers said to him, "Are you indeed to reign over us, or are you indeed to rule over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. And then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, "Behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me." But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you?" And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. Now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." And he said to him, "Here I am." So he said to him, "Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring me word." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. And a man found him, wandering in the fields. And the man asked him, "What are you seeking?" "I am seeking my brothers," he said. "Tell me, please, where are they pasturing the flock?" And the man said, "They have gone away, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. They saw him from afar, and before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams." But when Reuben heard it, he rescued him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life." And Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood, cast him into this pit here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand to restore him to his father." So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe the robe of many colors that he wore. And they took him and cast him into a pit. The pit was empty. There was no water in it. Then they sat down to eat. And looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels bearing gum, balm, and myrrh on their way to carry it down to Egypt. And then Judah said to his brothers, What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. And his brothers listened to him. Then Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up and lifted him up out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. They took Joseph to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not in the pit, he tore his clothes and returned to his brothers and said, The boy is gone, and where shall I go? Then they took Joseph's robe and slaughtered a goat and dipped the robe in the blood. And they sent the robe of many colors and brought it to their father and said, This we have found. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not. And he identified it and said, It is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces. And then Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, No, I shall go down to Sheol to my son mourning. Thus his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. All right. Well, that is a good portion of Joseph's story. And it's kind of the descent of Joseph. His father thinks into Sheol, we learn. He didn't descend to Sheol, he descended to Egypt. So this is where we are. We have read already and discussed a few weeks back verses 1 through 11. And let me just remind you of a few things there to set the stage for verses 12 through 17. Remember that there are essentially, we come into this chapter wanting to know in verse 2, these are the generations of Jacob. What becomes of the patriarch, or the line of the patriarchs, the line of promise, the line of blessing that was going to come to the earth, and all of the promises that attended them, that it's through them that they will receive these things. And specifically, there were some promises made to Jacob that he and his sons after him they would together receive some of this blessing that God had in store, and that as a one nation, which was itself a multitude of nations, they would inherit the land and bring blessings to the earth. And so we have this idea that we can't keep having just one son per generation. This eventually has to become a vast multitude of people. And Jacob specifically was told that he and his descendants together would share into these blessings. So it seems like it's Jacob and his sons who together would receive much from God and would kind of take the next step in God's purposes for the world. And so what will come of this? And we open up and immediately see how it seems impossible, because there's such division. You thought the division between Jacob and Esau was bad, and it was. But this is as bad. It's like we're back to Cain and Abel. It's unbelievable. And so immediately we begin to see that there are sharp divisions between 11 of the sons, or at least maybe 10 of the sons, all the sons except for Joseph and Benjamin, because they belonged to Rachel. But then even among the sons of Rachel, Joseph and Benjamin's kind of too young. He's kind of separate. All these others were kind of born kind of in a class together, in a group at kind of the same time. They grew up together and had favorites and had to deal with all that. Benjamin's a latecomer. And so he might still be despised, but he's not as despised as Joseph. And so it's kind of 10 against 1. And so this is Joseph. And he's grown up in this situation where there's constant jealousy and enmity. His, the Leah, his his stepmother, you might say, not really stepmother, but his half-mother, his father's only remaining wife. He was one who was hated by his father, right? We read that several times. And so it's just a very bad family situation. So they've grown up in this way. He goes out there, he's got a job to do with not with Leah's sons, but with the sons of these two concubines, one from Leah, one from his mother. And he goes out there, and he's just kind of new on the scene. He's given the servant boy status. He has to go do the little menial things. And yet, even as that young little servant boy who doesn't really know what all is supposed to be going on, he can see that his older siblings are not carrying out faithfully the will of their father. They're not diligently shepherding the flock. They're not doing what they're supposed to do. They're either causing trouble with one another or with the residents of the area. They're getting into controversy maybe in that way, or they're neglecting the flock. Whatever it is, there's a bad report. And that bad report comes into a situation in which Israel already had loved Joseph more than all of his sons, because he was the son of his old age. He was the honored son. He was the one upon whom he had pinned all his hopes and desires for the future. It's the same way that Abraham described Isaac, the son of my old age, even though he had had other sons after that. This was the one. And as a result then of this report coming in, so this was my loved son, and then he brings this report, and he makes for him then, as a response to this honored robe, this special garment, to set him out as distinct and as privileged and as above and superior to all of his brothers, as the one who was over them in some sense. Now they certainly rejected this notion, the brothers did. They resented it. They hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. When those brothers saw how much their father loved him more than all of them, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. So we have some obstacles here to this promise ever being fulfilled. The first obstacle is that Joseph's brothers are untrustworthy men. They're dishonest men. They are violent men. We've already read about that in the past when they slaughtered the people of Shechem. And so that's not a good situation, because these are the guys that are riled up and envious and angry at Joseph. And so it looks like there's all this tension. You've got these guys who fly off the handle and are very violent, and they're upset with their brother, who seems to be the one that, at least the father, as he looks out over things, thinks his opinion is that this is the one the blessing will really come through. And that's the one he's the one in the sights and the target, you might think, of his brothers, who are violent men. That's one problem. The second problem is Jacob himself fans the flame of this because he has such high regard for Joseph. He loves him so much. The favoritism there is a huge problem. And then the next problem, of course, is this dream that Joseph has. Verse 5, now Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. So now God gives a dream. God makes it worse. He gives a dream to Joseph, which is so spectacular that the naive lad can't even help but just share it. And he tells them all about what was happening. And they resent it. Verse 8, the second half of verse 8, so they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Verse 9, then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers, right, and said. And then verse 10, so he tells it to his brothers, but they hate it. They don't like what they hear, but he can't stop talking about it. So he tells them, they respond, and then later maybe they're eating dinner or something, and Dad's around and says, he wants to tell it all again to everybody. And he tells it again. They were just such vivid dreams, such clear dreams, such surprising dreams. He tells them. And his father rebukes him, which also might put him in a little bit of danger. If he's always Dad's very favorite, then you fear to do something lest you get in trouble with Dad. But when Dad turns against him too a little bit, it's like, well, maybe he's not so special after all, right? But the fact that he had two of these dreams, and they were so clear, even though his brothers rejected it and disbelieved it, and even though they had heard their father rebuke him, they still looked at him with jealousy because he had these dreams, and their belief was that these dreams came, in fact, likely from God. It wasn't just something that he dreamed. And so they become jealous to think, he's got everything. He's got the robe, he's got the honor, he's got the love, and he's got God's favor. And they're just so jealous of him. They're not willing to let this happen. His brothers were jealous of him, but his father, even though he rebuked him, still, because these were dreams and these were likely from God, he kept the saying in his mind and pondered it. And that's where we leave. So there's all this hope of promise that maybe Jacob wasn't wrong in seeing the worthiness of his son Joseph. Like Joseph, in one sense, didn't deserve the favoritism he got just because he was Rachel's son. But in another sense, as the children all lived their lives, he stood apart as better than they were. He was an honorable son, and that's the title of the message today, is An Obedient and Faithful Son. And that's all I want to do, is to look at Joseph in these next 6 verses in our story. He is an obedient and a faithful son. And in that way, he stands out as remarkable in this story. So here he is, verse 12, we begin. Now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. Let's read these 6 verses again. And Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." And he said to him, "Here I am." So he said to him, "Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring me word." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. And a man found him wandering in the fields, and the man asked him, "What are you seeking?" "I am seeking my brothers," he said. "Tell me, please, where are they pasturing the flock?" And the man said, "They have gone away, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. Now, when you read that, you might think, really, we're going to give a whole message on those verses? Yes, we are. And I'll trust that it will be very much worthwhile to have done so. So what I want to do is kind of look at this text first and just look at Joseph. So that's kind of the first heading, is a first look at Joseph. And then the second heading will be a second look at Joseph. But we'll take that look at him by looking at him as he contrasts with his brothers in the events, the things that his brothers are doing, and how opposite that is of what we've seen about him. So that's kind of initially how we'll proceed, and then we'll make some conclusions and talk about some things from there. So this first look at Joseph, we're going to break it down into a few categories. First of all, a willing obedience. Secondly, a brave obedience. Third, a diligent obedience. Willing, brave, and diligent. So first of all, Joseph's willing obedience. Notice in verse 13, "And Israel said to Joseph, 'Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them.' And he said, 'Here I am. Here I am.'" This is a response that demonstrates always an intimacy and a love and a readiness to listen and obey. Here I am. Whatever it is, ready to do it. And you've heard me say that a few times in Genesis already, because it's been used a few times in Genesis. Let me read to you a few of the times this phrase has occurred. "After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, 'Abraham,' and he said, 'Here I am. Here I am.'" He was willing to do whatever it was. Same story. "And Isaac said to his father, Abraham, 'My father.' And Abraham said to his son, 'Here I am, my son.' And he said, 'Behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering?'" Right? Abraham is just as open and intimate and willing toward his son as he is to God. There's a sense, you see, there's a competing. God says, "Abraham, here I am. Father, here I am." He's this way. But he's got to choose. Of course, then he chooses God. And then later on, the angel of the Lord called him from heaven and said, "Abraham, Abraham." And he said, "Here I am. Here I am." Here's another one. When Isaac was old, and his eyes were dim so that he could not see, he called Esau, his older son, and said, "My son." And Esau answered him, "Here I am." Right? You see the intimate connection, the love. I mean, this was his favored son. We never read about him saying this with Jacob. He never said, "Jacob, here I am, Father." We don't read that. We read it with Esau and Isaac, because Esau was Isaac's favorite. Or here's another place, Isaiah 65 and verse 1. God says, "I was ready to be sought by those who did not ask for me. I was ready to be found by those who did not seek me. I said, here I am, to a nation that was not called by my name." There's a picture of God, His willingness to interact, to be gracious and kind, and to help, to do what He can, His desire for intimacy. Right? Here I am. I'm at your, just come. So, but when a lesser speaks to a greater in terms of rank and says this thing, "Here I am," it has with it kind of a sense of a bowing. Here I am, whatever it is you might want. Recognizing the nature of our relationship, I'm wide open to you. Whatever you need, whatever it is, here I am. Now think of this. The last time that Jacob heard someone else use these words to anyone other than to God, because there was one time intervening where he said this to God. But other than that, the last time he heard these words was when he misled his father about who he was. He disguised himself as Esau and he called out, "My father!" And his father, thinking it was Esau, said, "Here I am." And then he deceived him and stole his brother's birthright. What a thing. So now Jacob calls out to his son, his favored son, right? "I will come and I will send you to them." And he said, "Here I am. Here I am." Unlike his father, when Joseph uses these words, "Here I am," he's being absolutely honest and sincere. In fact, it is only Jacob in all the Bible who ever utters these words in a false way. He's the only one, which shouldn't surprise us. I mean, the way that Jacob had been at that time in his life. Joseph here is a model of respect, honor, and willingness to obey and carry out his father's mission. We'll see that here in this. How much his willingness to do this is remarkable when we understand a little bit about the bravery necessary for such an obedience. Joseph demonstrates bravery in the face of possible danger. First of all, consider the length of the journey. The length of the journey. Now he's 17 years old. It is it's like 50 miles from Hebron to Shechem. He's there just outside of Hebron, so maybe it's not quite 50 miles, 47, 46, 48. It's about 50-mile journey, right? And you think, well, I can make it 50 miles. Well, okay. See ya, right? I mean, you're going to go from where? You're going to go from here to Troy? Just go walking? Don't walk the highway, because they didn't walk the highways back then, right? Get out and go just traipse through the land, find a little dirt path somewhere and make it. And don't be surprised if you run into some bandits along the way, right? Maybe some wild animals that you'd rather not be around, who are hungry and see you out traveling alone and they haven't seen anything that's easy prey so far. They're not sure, maybe you are or maybe you aren't, but they're going to come try. So you have to fend them off. Right? You can only pack so much, and you're going alone. I mean, that's the other thing that's stunning about Jacob sending Joseph alone. He's got servants. He didn't send any of them. He just sends Joseph alone. It's amazing that he does it. But he goes by himself on this 50-mile trip. This is a day and a day and age when locals, people who gathered together to try to farm something or raise some livestock, typically what they did is they would gather together and live together inside walls that they would build of rock to build up and try to fortify to keep people out, because the assumption was people were going to come take things that belong to you because they can. Right? There was no governing rule, and authority by which they could appeal that would exercise, the law and protect them. You're just on your own. And these cities very much just were out to protect themselves. Stealing and violence were not uncommon in a day when foreigners had little rights, if not given to them by the locals. We've already seen examples of that in Genesis, where Abraham has to beg and plead, in a sense, has to seek audience with the city elders, even to have the ability to purchase a field that none of them would have had to do that for, but he did because he was a foreigner. You don't open yourself up to people who you don't know when you're worried that they might do you harm. That's what happened in those days. In a day when people rarely traveled alone for safety reasons, in this sort of a situation, Joseph was sent out alone some 50 miles to find his brothers and to bring back a report about their welfare and also the welfare of the flock. 50 miles would have been a journey at least of several days, right? So surely he would have had about a week's supply of rations for the journey there and back, or perhaps maybe even just enough to get there, and the assumption was his brothers would provide him with enough food to get back. What a mistake that would have been, right? Now, I'm not saying that the length of this journey makes Joseph an extreme model of bravery. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that it does take some bravery to do what he did. It takes some courage to do this, especially when you add to that the specific place to which he was sent. Shechem. His family has a history with Shechem. Shechem, you remember, is not just a place. They call it Shechem, but there's a man there who had that name, Shechem. He was the man who had mistreated their sister Dinah sexually, right? And then Shechem was deceived by Jacob's sons into circumcising himself and all the men of the town, which was a trick to make them incapable of defending themselves. And when that happened, Simeon and Levi went in and slaughtered all the men of the town. And then Jacob's sons all went in and looted the town and took the women and the children and the possessions and the livestock for themselves. And Jacob responded to that and said that they had made Jacob a stench to the locals in the area, and he feared for revenge against him and his family. Now Jacob's sons then are out pasturing his flock, and he hears they've gone to Shechem, and he says, "Are they not pasturing my flock in Shechem? You need to go see how they're doing. This isn't good. Check, make sure they're all right, and see if my flock's okay, and bring me word." So thoroughly investigate and give me word. I'm concerned. So to return to that area was likely to mean finding conflict. Now, we might say, well, why would Jacob's sons go there? Well, they're just brash enough not to worry about conflict. Like, they're pretty well, like, bring it on, right? They might not be able to defend themselves as they think they can, but they're certainly not afraid. They're just that cocky and arrogant. They would go right through Shechem again. No problem. Jacob hears about it and he says, we better go find out what's going on. This is likely a major reason Jacob is seeking a report. Knowing the brothers have taken his flocks to Shechem, he's concerned for their welfare and the welfare of his flocks. So there's an essential aspect of this mission that Joseph is sent on, which is risky and dangerous. It's potentially going into somewhat hostile territory. If they're all identified and everybody remembers who they are, and if they decide to enact revenge, it's going to be trouble. So that's his brave obedience. Also consider his diligent obedience. Joseph's persistence to complete the task. Well, before I look at these specific details, let us just remember that Joseph as an individual has a long history of righteousness and faithfulness growing up. The example, what we've seen so far is he does seem to stand out from his brothers, but the things that are particular about him is this report he brought back, right? And then the fact that we know that Jacob, he loved him so much, he had pinned his hopes on him. He had some reasons for that. And then Joseph seemed to live up to those expectations. He was righteous when all of his brothers weren't. I mean, you know how, that's kind of hard, right? Especially like you're the younger brother, and all the older siblings are doing what you know they shouldn't, but it's just kind of okay, Dad doesn't know about it, and then guess what? Now you're with them, and it's like, come on, join in, and you don't. And in the face of what you know will get you will raise their ire and cause them to dislike you and probably get you some mistreatment later, you still bring a faithful and honest report about what happened to your father. That takes courage. That's hard. He has a long history in his life of righteousness and faithfulness, where his brothers do not. But in this story, there's this continued pursuit of the father's mission and for his father's welfare. He takes first of all, I'm willing to go. Here I am. So he gives them the mission. Go now, see if it's well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring me word. So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. So he goes there, and he gets to Shechem. So I don't know how they heard that he was going to Shechem. Maybe the sons sent the last of their father's tattletale servants off and say, go tell them we're going to Shechem. We're going to go. Or maybe the servant says, I'm not going. Well, we're going. The servant comes and gets word to Jacob or something. And Jacob hears, they went to Shechem. We better find out how they're doing, what's going on. Or he hears from some other passerby. Some guy travels through Hebron. And he says, hey, did you see my sons in the field, how they're doing? He says, oh, we didn't see anybody. Well, and he describes them. Oh, well, they were at Shechem. Shechem? What are they doing at Shechem? Right? Go find out what's going on and see if they're okay. Somehow he hears they're at Shechem. He doesn't like that, but he hears about it. He sends Joseph 50 miles out there to get to Shechem, and he's out there outside the area, and he's wandering around looking for them. Hillside after hillside, valley after valley, they're nowhere to be found. They're not there. How easy would it be to just say, I'm going home. Dad, I don't know where they are. I haven't found them. But that wasn't the purpose. Like, that's the easy way out, right? Go to Shechem, see how they are. I went to Shechem, didn't see them, come home. And Dad says, hey, what happened? How are they? I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? I told you to go find out. Well, you told me to go to Shechem and find out, and they weren't at Shechem, so I went home. Okay. I can't trust you. Take that robe off. Give it to the servant. Go find out, would you please? Right? This is the idea. It's not easy. There are many opportunities to just turn back and just say, I looked around. They're not here. But he continues to look. How long was he out there? We're not told. He's out there. Some man just comes upon him. Right? And a man, we're not told, we're not given a name. A man. Some guy finds him. What's he doing? Wandering around in the fields. That's what it looked like. And that's what it looks like when someone's looking for someone. You don't know what they're looking for, or you don't know that they're actually looking for something. They're just going around. It's like, some guy notices, and he comes out to him, what are you doing? What are you looking for? Can I help you? You look lost. Well, I'm not lost, but I'm concerned. I'm looking for these brothers of mine. Have you seen them? They were shepherding this flock of my father. Where are they at? And the man said, they have gone away. For I heard them say, let us go to Dothan. The guy that he happens to bump into is maybe the only guy in the area that could have told him where the brothers went. He happened to hear them say, not only did he bump into them out there, but he even overheard them say, we're going to go to Dothan. So he says, well, they went on to Dothan. Could have said, well, Dad only told me to go as far as Shechem. I'm going to head back. It's 16 miles further. It's going to take me another whole day, maybe a day and a half, because how much time has he already spent in Shechem? What time of day is it now? He's making a campfire, going to eat the little bit of rations he has left, and he's got maybe nothing left to go the extra 16 miles, or he's bartering with this guy for food. We don't know. But it's not a light thing to have to go another 6. I mean, it was hard to go 50 miles. Now he's got another 16. The brothers are nowhere to be found. What are they doing? So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. And this is just a picture of the continued pursuit to successfully carry out his father's mission. Right? There's a reason he has the coat. His father has rightly seen something in him. He stands out as a model here. His faithfulness to his father, his obedience, his willingness. He took no shortcut. He didn't do anything halfway. He didn't have to be told 100 times. He didn't have to come back and say, no, that wasn't what I told you. Go do it again. Go do it again. Go do it. He just did it. Absolutely right. Be above and beyond what he was told in order to carry out what he knew was intended. An obedient son. His diligence. So his willingness, his bravery, his diligence, you see it all here. He's remarkable. That's the first look at Joseph. Now let's take another look. Let's look at some other things in the text and learn some more about him here. The first thing I want to say is to talk a little bit about previous details before we get here. Things that we should carry with us into the text. Moses has already set up this sharp division in character between Joseph and his brothers, where we are, I hope we're at the point where we are sort of reading them as foils of one another, opposite ends of the spectrum, right? So if I tell you these men are on opposite ends of the spectrum, and I go over here and talk about all the bad things about their brothers, about his brothers, then you know, well, we're inferring the opposite good things about Joseph. And then I come over here to tell you these good things about Joseph, and not only am I saying these good things about Joseph, but because we all understand him on the other side of the spectrum, we know the opposite things are true about his brother. Right? It's not always that way with people. Like people usually aren't on one side of the spectrum or the other. But the way Moses is telling these things, these brothers are on opposite ends. Joseph isn't just not as unrighteous as his brothers. He's extremely righteous. His brothers aren't just not quite as good as he is. They're extremely evil. Does this make sense? So we're on opposite ends here. It's like Cain and Abel. Moses tells us certain good things about Abel and his sacrifice and certain negative things about Cain and his sacrifice. But they're always, he looks at, says good things about, or bad things about Cain, and we're inferring good things about Abel. Then he says these other good things about Abel, and you infer the bad things about Cain. And this is the way it works here with these men, this group of brothers. He has already told us the story of Joseph's brothers and how they were deceptive, they were violent, full of vengeance. These men are untrustworthy, they're selfish. All of these things he's told us, right? He's told us they were deceptive in the way they lied to Shechem and the people of that town. Violent and full of vengeance in the way they enacted their revenge. Untrustworthy in the way that Joseph brought a bad report about them. And selfish in the way that they had envy and jealousy over their brother Joseph. It's not a good combination. Now, all of us might have some element of these sins in our lives, but these men are characterized by those sins. Now, against that black backdrop of the dark character of his brothers, Joseph's character shines out as exemplary. But now we have new details which will serve to affirm our opinions and to deepen our opinions and to entrench us in this position that we're beginning to take, that Joseph truly is a man apart among his brothers. So some of these new details. First of all, as this account proceeds, the details we receive about the other sons of Jacob should continue to alert us about this sharp distinction in character. So the first thing is the order of the narrative. That sounds like a peculiar thing. The order of the narrative. Just it's subtle, but listen. Verse 12. Now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. And then Israel said to Joseph, are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? So we read there, the sons, the brothers, we read about the actions of the sons of Jacob and then Jacob's reaction. Right? So just think of that. When we read about the story, the sons are out doing something and that Jacob hears of it and responds to what they're doing. With Joseph, it's opposite. With Joseph, we read about the father and his will and command, and then we hear his willing response. Come, I will send you to them. And he said to him, here I am. So the order is different, and that's interesting. Right? He could have said, he could have started out, Israel said to his sons, go shepherd my go pasture my flock, in the valley. And then we could have read, well, they disobeyed and they went over here and they did that. And then so he responded. But here we just read, they're out doing these things kind of on their own, what they're doing. He is not happy with it. And so he's alarmed and he responds. That's how that order of things goes. The actions of the sons and then his response. But for Joseph, it's his father's will and command and his willing response to carry it out. So just that order gives us a distinction. Think about also the risks that Jacob took with Joseph in order to get news. That speaks to us about the desperation of the situation. He's greatly concerned at the actions of his sons who have gone off to Shechem. He fears they're putting themselves and his entire flock at risk. And he can have no confidence in their faithfulness to care for his property from such a long distance away. That they've shown is when they went out there in the field, as soon as someone was out there, as soon as he had a way to find out what they were doing, he knew and was aware that they were doing wrong. And now they're way out. They're 50 miles away. What are they doing? Their reason for traveling so far away outside of his reach, we all know it. This can't be good. They can't be up to something good. And so he sends his son to them in order to get news. So you see that distinction. These sons are not only disobeying, but they're putting so much at risk. And then it's such a bad circumstance that he risks his own son to go, you go. Maybe they weren't listening to the servant. Now you're going to go. Go tell him. Find out what's going on and get word back to me. I'm very concerned. Why would you do that? Why would you risk this? Because it's desperate. Things are sort of spiraling out of control. He's deeply concerned. And then Joseph gets there, and the fact that his brothers were nowhere near Shechem when he arrived, but had gone another 16 miles away, also tells you a lot about the brothers in comparison with Joseph. Not only had they not gone where initially their father kind of expected them to go, they went all the way out to Shechem. He's very concerned. Why would they even go to Shechem? They know what probably awaits us there. What are they doing? Then they get there and they've gone on even further. They've not sent word to their father in any way. They're there with his livelihood. It's not like they didn't show up on time. They are gone with his possessions, with his flocks. They took off, and they're nowhere. They're not where he expects them to be. They're not where he heard they were. They're somewhere else entirely. What a contrast between them and Joseph, who he could look at and say, hey, go up to Shechem and get word. And he goes and he does it exactly. And he does even more than that in order to succeed in his father's mission. What a sharp contrast between these brothers. Okay then. That is just by way of the text itself. Things to take away. What do we take away from something like this? Well, all of this ought to have several effects upon us as we read. The first effect it should have is to cause us to be convinced about the righteousness of Joseph. Right? Man, he's so different than all the rest of them. He is the very picture of a faithful son. He's diligent in all things. He's entrusted because of that with responsibility and with privilege and with freedoms that they don't have because of this. Because he's a faithful son. He's diligent in the things that he's given to do. What a picture. Right? Joseph is entrusted to go out there by himself all the way out to Shechem and report on them. When his father hears that they're at Shechem, because it's them, and because it's at Shechem, he's got no confidence in what's going on. He's desperately concerned and worried. He's got to send the only one he can trust to go and get word. Man, what a righteous young man he is. He stands apart. The second effect it has is to make us see the depths of division between Joseph and his brothers. He simply stands apart, and listen to this, is important, for his ideal son-like qualities. In all the ways he stands out are ways that are They're the ideal for a son. Right? These are the ways, and every father wants their son to be this way. In some ways, need their sons to be this way. All their efforts and goals and work is so that their sons would be this way. And when they're not, it's so hard, right? He stands apart for all of his son-like qualities, whereas his brothers are the perfect pictures of the foolish sons we read about in Proverbs. Proverbs 10:8, the wise of heart will receive commandments, but a babbling fool will come to ruin. Right? The wise of heart receives commandments. That's Joseph. But a babbling fool will come to ruin. That's his brothers. They're opposite of him. And that's the concern, right? These babbling fools have gone up to Shechem and come to ruin. Go, let's find out. Let's see what's going on. Are they okay? Find out about their peace. How's it going with them? Proverbs 15:5, a fool despises his father's instruction, but whoever heeds reproof, right, is prudent. Whoever heeds reproof is prudent. A fool despises his father's instruction, which has been the course of their life. Joseph goes out and brings back a bad report. They're not doing what they're supposed to do. Ecclesiastes 7 and verse 9. Ecclesiastes 7:9. Be not quick in your spirit to become angry. Why not? For anger lodges in the bosom of fools. Don't be quick to be angry, because anger just lodges in there and stays in there in the bosom of fools. Well, that's his brothers. They get upset about this thing and they hate him even more, and now they're jealous of him, and they're sick and tired of him. Don't be quick to be angry. Anger lodges in the heart of fools. Don't let anger quickly come up all the time. That's what fools do. And that's exactly what these brothers have been. Proverbs 19:13, a foolish son, and this is the concern that Jacob has, a foolish son is ruin to his father. Is ruin to his father. That's what his concern is. What do you do? Get word. Joseph, go and see what's going on. Check on your brothers. The third effect it should have upon us is to make us realize the extreme peril that Joseph was now in. Even if he and his father did not realize the full extent of this danger, because you can be sure, if they thought that these brothers might murder him, he never would have sent Joseph. Jacob never would have sent him. And Joseph never would have gone alone. They never had imagined that their hatred had risen to that level and had run that deep and had so swallowed up everything. Moses tells us that so that we know, so that we come to the story and as we read it we think, oh no, this is awful. But Joseph didn't know it, and Jacob didn't know it, but we know it. Proverbs 17:12. Listen, let a man meet a she-bear robbed of her cubs rather than a fool in his folly. And this is exactly Exhibit A right here. Here are these boys out there, his brothers, utter fools. And he goes out there. And Proverbs tells us it would be better for a man to meet a she-bear who had been robbed of her cubs and have to deal with that than to deal with a fool in his folly. And we see that that's the reality. They're ready to kill him. And he would have died. This is what we see. And then consider also the danger that he's in. Think of this picture. He goes out some 50 miles away. He's out there just wandering around Shechem, looking lost and alone, looking for his brothers, dejected, not finding them, beginning to get concerned and worried. What's happened? Imagine if you were picturing over some lion on a mountainside, watching this boy travel around with no particular place to be or go, not knowing where he's going or what he's doing. You're ready to pounce. You're ready to get him. He's the one who's strayed from the herd. He's all alone. We can take him. And the picture is not that we don't read about there was a lion. Like, I don't mean that, but just the picture, if you were to paint the scene, is one of desperation and weakness and vulnerability. And then from there, he happens upon a man. Oh, they're there. And now he's got to go out even further. The situation is bleak. We should be frightened for him, concerned for him. We ought to be worried. Now, the last takeaway comes from all of this, comes to us later. Like, if we're just reading this story for the first time here, we should be really worried and stuff. But the last takeaway, the thing that I think is the most helpful for us, the one we can pack up with us and keep with us for the rest of our lives, happens upon a second reading of the story. Once you know how everything ends, and you come back and you reread it, and you come to these details, and we come to this point of the story. I'm not going to reread the whole, or read the entire Joseph story now. But my point is this. The last takeaway is something I don't think you're likely to get on the first reading of the story, but on a second reading, if you're thoughtful and careful. Think of this. Let's set these points down side by side. The peril of Joseph at this point and the promises of God concerning him. Right? We know the promises of God concerning him. We know how the story ends. But don't let the fact that you know how the story ends take the drama out of this scene and the peril out of this scene. He's in real danger. Let's get a sense for that. The great danger Joseph is in right now, humanly speaking. Right? It's awful. I mean, we know that these brothers would like to murder him. We know that they've cast themselves out. They are in the process right now of absolute defiance and disobedience to their father and a recklessness with those things that belong to him. They could care less about their father's will, and we know they hate their brother. We know they're violent and vengeful men. And now their brother is out some 66 miles from home, alone, and we read in a moment, with that robe on. And it's terrifying. Like, this guy is going to die. It's no surprise that they conspired to kill him. We ought to be greatly afraid for Joseph at this point of the story. It cannot go well for him. Every aspect of his situation, when you consider it, is terrifying. And so I want to pause and say and apply this to yourself and say, look, you're going to be in situations in life where you look out and things seem hopeless. You're sent on this mission. It's impossible to do. Things aren't going well. You're concerned about your welfare. You're out here all alone. Nobody's going to help you. It's just doom and gloom. That's the only thing that can come. Nothing good can possibly come from this. You're in utter peril. And yet, all these promises that God had, and we end up, the exact opposite happens. All these things were meant for evil, but God had met in them and through them and in spite of them, He was working good. And the experience wasn't pleasurable, it was awful. We read later about how he's pleading with his brothers not to cast him into the pit. And they should have listened. But they didn't. But God had made him these promises, you see. And God was true to them. And Joseph couldn't have known that it was the peril that made possible the promise. He couldn't have known it. He just experienced it. He just faced the danger and the fear. But into that situation, we know, because we've read the rest of the story, wait a minute, God's going to work it out. There's all these promises that God, you don't know it yet, Joseph, but watch what happens. Things are going to go great. Eventually. Right? It's going to be another 20-something years, but it'll happen. Right? So learn from Joseph also the patience of that, right? But it's such a huge thing to take from Joseph, to to let yourself be put on the edge of your seat as you read this, and to be wringing your hands with fear for him, because you should. Because the picture is terrible, it's bleak, it's dangerous. And then to say, but God's going to work it out. God had made him these promises. I'm confident. I mean, try to do it without looking at the rest of the story and say, but wait a minute, I know God made promises. We can stand on that. Don't give heart, or don't lose heart, Joseph. Don't give in. Press on. Don't be afraid. Can we talk to him that way without knowing the rest of the story? Because, beloved, we have to talk to each other that way, not knowing the rest of our stories, but just taking it on promise of what God has said will happen one day. Right? We've got to be able to come alongside Joseph and say, I saw where they went, and you can go if you hurry. God be with you. Right? We've got to be able to do that with one another, to help and encourage each other, and to have confidence in these promises God has made us. That's not easy, right? But we've got this pledge of his love for us, right? God's love for us. He gave up his own Son for us. Will he not with him also freely give us all things? We've got Christ, who died and rose again to justify us. Who's going to condemn us? Nobody. He's the one who gets to decide and judge. And he gave his life for us that we might be justified. We have a down payment of the promises we've been given. What's the down payment? This Holy Spirit poured out for us. This earnest, partial payment of what will come. We've got so many extra reasons to be confident in what God has promised us that Joseph didn't have. Like Joseph, we're going to be going through these sorts of trials and difficulties. We'll be placed in situations where all we see is peril. And the question is, where's your faith? Right? That's the last takeaway. To understand the peril and to remember and exhort ourselves about the promise at the same time. So, today, what do we have? Just again, we have this obedient son, this remarkable son, who stands apart from all of his brothers as the only one worthy of trust, the only one worthy of the responsibilities he's been given, the only one who faithfully carries out the will of his Father. And opposite that, we have these murderous, violent, foolish sons. Jacob is worried they'd be a ruin to him. And in a way they are, right? They are. They come back with this news, which we'll read later, and he's undone. The only reason Joseph was even out there was because they couldn't be trusted. If they were trustworthy, he never would have had to send Joseph. And now, for all he knows, Joseph was killed by some animal, and he's lost. Of course he won't be comforted and consoled by those boys. It's their fault. He doesn't realize the extent to which it's their fault. If he knew the full story, think about it, these promises, the promises of God that they would all be united as a family couldn't be fulfilled if Jacob saw through their lie. They had to successfully deceive their father about how Joseph died, or the family would have been over. It's incredible. There's so many things through this story where we will see God has got his hand, even in the midst of the sin that these people commit. He's working things out so that his purposes are fulfilled. Well, beloved, let us have confidence in God. Let us marvel at Joseph. Let us think of Joseph and look past Joseph to another obedient son who was far more obedient than Joseph ever was, who did in fact successfully carry out the will of his father and save a multitude of sinners. Right? Who could say, not my will, but yours be done. The perfect picture of an obedient father, of an obedient son, to his father. What wonderful, wonderful truths. There was only one son that Jacob could entrust this mission to. And similarly, there was only one son that God could entrust this mission to save sinners, to rescue us, to inquire about our welfare and assure its security. Well, that's all I have today. Are there questions or comments? Anything about the text or something that maybe we've raised as we've worked through here?